and information and technology company. And it's an honor to be here in Tbilisi. The reception from Georgian officials and investors here has been terrific. Today I'm honored to be accompanied by some absolutely extraordinarily distinguished guests who I will just spend a couple of minutes introducing so you're aware of their background and who they are and what they do. Thank you all for joining us. Let me start first with David Tvalishvili on my right. David is Deputy Minister for the Ministry of Economy and Sustainable Development of Georgia, has 25 years experience in the sector. He's been successfully leading JSC Georgian Oil and Gas Corporation and JSC Georgian State Electrosystem, and in 1999 was awarded a Medal of Honor for the contribution to development of the Baku-Supsa pipeline. So thank you, Minister, for joining us today. To my left, your right, I think that is Mr. Yashar Lativov. Mr. Lativov is the Vice President of the State Oil Company of Azerbaijan and has been since 2016. He also has long-term experience in the development of international projects across the globe and also appointed to the office of SOCAR, Vice President for Field Development. Over further to the right of David is Ms. Aida Sidkova. Ms. Sidkova is a Director for Energy and Natural Resources, Russia, Caucasus and Central Asia for the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development and leads the team there driving the energy portfolios of economies in transition and holds an MBA from Thunderbird, the American Graduate School for International Management. Then switching back again over to my left, we have Mr. Werner Liepach. Mr. Liepach, as Director General and West Asia, as Director General in West Asia Department of the Asia Development Bank, which I'll refer to in shorthand as ADB, is responsible for the ADB's regional portfolio, which now stands at 18.5 billion, 147 projects and programs in 7 sector divisions, ADB headquarters and 10 country offices covering energy, environment, natural resources, transport, public management, financial sector, social, urban and water development. And then finally, over to my far right, Mr. Wang Lei. Mr. Lei is Vice President of China Tianchen Engineering Corporation, one of the leading international engineering corporations in the world, heads the team focusing on mega overseas EPC projects. So as you can see, we've got a really excellent mix of senior policymakers, multilateral institutions, investors, and leaders from the corporate space. And just listening to some of the excellent discussion and debate this morning, it's clear that the future of energy, whether it be purely commercial, geopolitical, the transition that we're facing, is a hot topic not just on the policy landscape, but also on the investment landscape. So let me start with a first question to Minister Tvalishvili, and apologies, David. Apologies for that. I also have a slightly difficult last name, so I know what that's like. But before I do that, I'm going to put up a polling question, which our organisers have asked you to consider, which is, what do you consider as the most powerful factor affecting energy security? I think I know what I would say to that, but I'll leave that one to you. You have 3 options. Have a think about that. Put that thought into your polling answers, and we'll have a question and discussion about that later on. So, David, let me start with you. Pithy question. What do you see as the main challenges, really, for cross-border trading, and how does your government plan to address them?
Thank you very much, Konstantin. Of course, this cross-border trading is always a challenge, especially in our region. But Georgia has a very substantial and great experience in tackling these problems of associated with cross-border tradings. Just 25 years ago, after gaining the independence, Georgia and the neighboring countries, we together decided to build a export routes for Caspian oil and gas to international, to world markets. There was an immediate need to do so, and there were a lot of challenges associated with these projects. I mean, I'm talking about now, for the moment, about the oil and gas, transportation of oil and gas from the Caspian region. I think the first challenge was to establish this contractual relationship between, among the numerous countries, not only among the countries involved, but also international financial institutions involved in all these developments. That was the big challenge, really. In addition to that, we had to establish in Georgia enabling environment, I mean legal environment for these costly and huge infrastructure projects. Together with the Parliament of Georgia at that time and together with the government, we did it, of course, successfully. In addition, there were some environmental and social problems associated with these pipelines, oil and gas pipelines. But again, we were successful in tackling those challenges. The construction itself was, construction of this project, the construction process took a long time, 3 years, sometimes for specific projects it took even 4 years. But step by step, we were successful in those developments. So as a result, we have 3 huge pipelines in Georgia coming from Azerbaijan to world markets. But I want to underline and highlight that the main driver for such cooperation, for tackling these problems, were this cooperation, regional cooperation. And in addition to regional cooperations, we needed also the support and collaboration from the consumer countries, from European countries as well. And I think we have tackled these challenges. If I concentrate on what we have, what kind of challenges we have now, there are some challenges, of course, not the same type of challenges and same magnitude of challenges we had before 25 years ago or 20 years ago. This is in relation with the electricity cross-border trading. So of course, we've been trading with our neighbors, with Azerbaijan, Turkey, Armenia, Russia for the last 20 years, of course, and we know how to do it. This trading, but there are still challenges. Mainly the challenges are of physical nature. The main problem is that Georgia, you know that Georgia is an importer, net importer importer of electricity, and the problem is that we cannot receive from these 4 sources at the same time the electricity, because we have to choose. We have to be with Azerbaijan, with Russia, or with, let's say, sometimes with Armenia. And this is a big problem that we don't have one electrical system with all our neighboring countries, but we are working on that as well. There are some physical problems as well. With Armenia, we have a line, of course, connection line, high voltage transmission line, but the capacity is not adequate to trade adequately. At the same time, with Russia, there is sufficient capacity of the line, but it runs through the challenging terrain, and at specific periods of time, we have some problems of operating this line. For example, with Azerbaijan, we have both, but at the same time, we need some flexibility of supplying from Azerbaijan, I mean, which can be adapted to our situation and our needs and changing needs. But again, I just want to finish with this. There are additional lines which are now under the development, under the construction, under the planning, which will solve these problems. But I want to conclude that through regional cooperation, this everything is possible. This this energy cross-border trading can be even more successful. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, David, for that quite broad-ranging exposition. Let me switch to my left, Mr. Lativov. Your perspective as Vice President of the State Oil Company, as the demand for energy rises, and that seems to be a given, alongside challenges of scarcity and environmental constraint, how can the oil and gas industry remain competitive and really adapt to those challenges?
Yeah, thank you, David. Oh, thank you, Konstantin. It's a loaded question. It refers to the oil and gas industry, but I will try to give an answer with specific references to the company that I represent, which is the State Oil Company of Azerbaijan Republic, SOCAR. The recipe, I think, is not unique. It's universal. It's the right people with right competencies and right training, equipped with right plants and machineries, and on top of it, the right strategic framework supplemented by the right policies and procedures. So when it comes to the people, Azerbaijan government and SOCAR specifically has been channeling in the last couple of decades its revenues to international and local scholarship programs, to vocational training courses, to Baku Higher Oil School, to summer schools, and that represented the fundamental basis of building the human capital. And I'm pleased to inform, like when we see the crisis in Europe, in Western Europe, following 2013, 2014 oil price crashes, kind of the oil industry is facing the deficit of human personnel amounting to 500,000 people. We in Azerbaijan have got the best and talented people going and studying petroleum engineering and oil and gas. On a corporate-wide basis, since 2015, we've been executing the Human Resources Management Process Transformation Program, which enables us to use the best international practices in terms of the recruitment, in terms of the competence management, in terms of the retention, in terms of remuneration and motivation. So with the good human capital element comes the ability to manage the plants and machineries, most of which is done locally. I'm pleased to inform that it's very interesting to attend this conference when we talk about the Silk Road and infrastructure and representing the exploration and production segment of the State Oil Company. We produce the resources which feeds into those infrastructure projects. So as State Oil Company, we produce, we hear about or know about ACG and Shah Deniz, but as State Oil Company, we develop other fields like Umit Field and Bula Field, where the geological complexity of the fields is within the top 5 geologically complex fields, following some of the most complex areas in the Gulf of Mexico or in the North Sea. And I'm pleased to report that as State Oil Company, we have come up with the system whereby we build the platforms and we build the machineries with our own resources, drill most complex wells safely in an environmentally responsible manner. Like earlier this year, we have completed the record breaking for the modern history of SOCAR well from Umit field, which is producing or has capacity to produce 2.5 million cubic meters per day. That's almost 1 billion cubic meters of gas from one well. So it's a record breaking for SOCAR. And we build those, as I said, platforms on our own. Or another example, the construction and mobilization of the 6th generation semi-submersible rig called Heydar Aliyev, which was mobilized to drill the first well in the Absheron field, which we developed together with Total. And again, I'm pleased to report that we managed to drill the appraisal leg from that well, which is deepest in the Caspian. The depth is 7,411 meters. And we also drilled from the same well production leg, which has got a depth of 6,800 meters and is capable to produce 1.5 billion cubic meters of gas from that well. So this is right people using the right machinery and plant to achieve the right result. And on top of it, when I refer to the strategic framework, it's of course continuous optimization of the portfolio of segments and value chain. So essentially, as a company, we have got production unit, which is Azneft, which produces oil and gas and feeds its feedstock to the Heydar Aliyev oil refinery, which in turn feeds naphtha to the Azeri Kimya petrochemical complex, which then goes to SOCAR Polymer to produce the final product. So essentially, we cover everything from pour to the manufacturing workshop. Another example, again talking about the production, Azneft as a production union uses in-house drilling resources, using in-house construction resources, producing gas, which also goes to the gas processing plant, which goes to Azeri Gas as a gas distribution system, and then also goes to SOCAR Methanol and SOCAR Carbamide plant, which has been recently commissioned. The other element is diversification and the internationalization of our value chain with SOCAR trading, for example, trading not only our system oil, but also trading third-party petrochemical products and also oil. And there is an interesting integration between SOCAR trading and the Star refinery. If we cover Turkey, yes, Star refinery producing naphtha and using it as a feedstock for our petrochemical complex. So the message is that we are building the value chain which is well balanced and well integrated, and it enables us to, or this diversification and integration makes our business immune to market volatility and makes it less dependent on any particular product or any particular service. And I'm also pleased that this internationalization has displayed itself in the best form here in Georgia. SOCAR Georgia, represented here by its head, Mr. Mair Mamedov, in great partnership with local authorities and state authorities, has managed to increase the share of the customer base from 48% to 76%, and increase the, in absolute number, the customer base to 750 abonnents, which essentially speaks that we are trying to be the best partner and the best service provider for the place we are present in, and that also kind of provides a certain share to the question that you posed. And of course, when it comes to the environmental point, I can't be here and not talk about the Southern Gas Corridor, $40 billion unprecedented investment, probably the biggest project in the world, tying the underground resources in the Azerbaijan sector of the Caspian Sea. 7 countries bringing gas to the Eastern European markets, and we know that Europe has got an objective to reduce its carbon emissions by 40% in 2030, and this gas will be fit for the purpose in terms of achieving this environmental, at the same time, constraint but opportunity objective.
Thank you very much indeed. And that last point, thank you very much indeed. And that last point, I think, provides a great segue, Ida, your perspective at the EBRD. And we've heard about these aspirations for reduction of carbon footprints, various paths to net zero. So the future of energy does, across a range of dimensions, seem to be looking at sustainable, low-carbon solutions. And in 2018, the EBRD devoted 36% of its total investment to the green economy and launched your new energy strategy. How do we continue down that path, and how do we scale beyond that?
Yep, thank you. Thank you for the question. Indeed, well, first of all, thank you for inviting us to big thank you to the Georgian authorities, especially to the Ministry of Economy and Sustainable Development for inviting us. I mean, it's really a great forum. And the questions that are posed are indeed very interesting because last year, the strategy that the bank approved, energy strategy that we approved, encompasses 3 big directions. All targeted towards decarbonization or reducing carbon footprint and building sustainable economies in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. And the 3 parts of that story are basically renewables, so scaling up renewables. And there I can say that we've done quite a lot as of today. It's over 5 billion euro in 173 renewable projects in 30 countries. In the region that I cover, Eurasia, we've done almost over 1 gigawatt, not almost, but over 1 gigawatt of renewable clean capacity, including in Georgia. So scaling up of renewables is in our mandate. Another big part is gas, which we see as a clean transition fuel towards renewable energy. And gas there is not just due to the fact that it's a low carbon fuel, but also due to the fact that it provides a base load that is needed for the intermittent renewable energy. So there, again, EBRD is a proud financier of the Southern Gas Corridor. We participated in TANAP and TAP, and we believe that gas would be that bridge fuel. And the third part is, of course, networks and ability of networks to absorb the intermittent capacity, to provide a reliable supply of electricity to consumers. The overall energy trilemma as applied to EBRD, which is affordable, secure, and sustainable energy, is really best expressed through what we do in renewables. On the affordable front, we've all seen the record low prices achieved in our region. Just as recent as 2 weeks ago, we saw 268 cents achieved in Uzbekistan auctions. So the way there we see the way to affordable is through the competitive procurement of renewable energy. The way to scale it up is again through having an open tender and provide necessary conditions for the investors to come and invest. So the second big and of course, on the affordable side, nothing would have happened without China Inc. and without this brutal competition in China among the manufacturers of solar and wind equipment, which gave the whole boost to the overall global renewable industry. On the sustainable part, I think it's obvious. We've all seen the IPCC report. We have 8 years left before things before the point of no return happens. And there we really, the EBRD institutionally are very aware of that. And finally, on the security of energy supply, we think that renewables in combination with appropriate networks provide that solution. and the renewables can actually be quite secure given that, given appropriate integration across countries. So overall, renewables will be scaling up. Yesterday, IEA, the International Energy Agency, just issued a report saying that renewables will be up by 50% in the next 5 years. So it's up by 1.2 terawatt, which is the capacity of the US basically today. So there will be massive scale up, powered by many factors, and we at the BRD are very, very hopeful. We want to see faster, secure, and affordable transition towards renewables and overall decarbonization.
Thank you very much for that, Ada. Let me switch to you, Werner. Again, a unique perspective at the Asian Development Bank. Give us a sense, if you could, of the sort of high-level core role of the ADB in development of the energy sector.
Thanks for the question. Yeah, you mentioned ADB Development Bank, so we are a bank, but more importantly, we are a development bank. So we don't just look at financing projects, but we look at the broader dimensions of development, and energy obviously is one of the key drivers. I'm covering the region, everything that is west of China and India. So that is the Central Asian countries, from Kazakhstan all the way to here in Georgia, including Azerbaijan. Then it goes down also to Afghanistan and Pakistan. So we're taking a quite a regional approach, because it is clear that if you want to tackle the energy situation, the complexities and challenges, you can't do that at the national level. You need to take a regional approach, and this is where the ADB comes in. If you look at the region as a whole, there is a lot of, it's overall, it's a very energy-rich region, but it's still not evenly distributed. It's also a region, if you want to develop, of course, there is an increasing demand for energy. The energy consumption overall is not at the level that you have of more developed countries, so it's pretty obvious if you develop more and you grow, you need more energy. And I think the real challenge is that you can make the energy available with the security at those places where it is needed. And it is first and foremost within the region, but then the region also can be, of course, a source of export of energy to the larger periphery, which is Europe to the west, and then you have China to the east, and also South Asia, India in particular, which has huge energy demands. So one challenge is internal coordination within the region, and then the second is possibly whether there is a chance to export things. So ADB, what are we doing? One thing is we have a program called CAREC, stands for Central Asia Regional Economic Cooperation Program. I think you may have heard about it. And it groups 11 countries together. And one of the flagship initiatives in this program is energy coordination. So we developed a new strategy, Energy Strategy 2030, where countries committed to some core principles to foster the regional coordination and cooperation in energy. And it's quite interesting, as you put up the questions earlier, now they're gone, but you ask what are the key challenges, and I'd be very interested to see what comes out. But I think it's a little bit of everything. It's technological, of course, it's also economic, and it is political. I think all three areas need to be addressed, and we can't just work on a single aspect of it. We work at each aspect with different tools and instruments, but these things need to be addressed. And CAREC is a unique platform, actually, to bring together the countries also at the policy level. Earlier this morning in the opening session, there was an overwhelming response of 94% that the policy coordination is needed if you want to progress, and I do absolutely believe in this, and that is where ADB comes in. I think we are playing a key role as a policy coordinator. For instance, now we help to revitalize the CAPS, the Central Asia Power System. As you know, under the Soviet Union, they actually had an integrated market, and then it totally collapsed, and now we are trying to reestablish this. But it's under a totally new context. you're looking also at the technological changes that are happening. You see at the changes in demand patterns. And that also requires a lot of technological innovation, and the digitalization of economy becomes very important in that aspect as well. We also need now to factor in, as a development bank, we need to factor in climate change and the sustainable development goals. So if things weren't just complex enough to provide the region with the energy, we need to make sure that the region is actually supplied with sustainable energy. So these dimensions of technological advancement, how can we make that happen, play a major role in this. And then at the end of it, of course, yes, capital is needed. We estimate that there is a demand of about $400 billion needed in energy investments, power sector investments, because we're not even talking about oil and gas, by 2030 to actually meet the demands in here. $400 billion, obviously, that can't be done alone by the public sector, so the private sector needs to come in. There are still challenges related to the risk-bearing capacity and how the risks are being allocated. So I think a big challenge is actually to bring this capital in. And these are some of the things that the ADB is doing. Policy coordination, providing technical assistance, but also help to catalyze investments. Thank you.
Werner, thank you very much indeed for that. Let me switch, Wang, to you. Completely different perspective, or lens, shall we say, from the corporate investor business perspective, as Vice President of China Tianqian Engineering, leading international engineering corporation. In terms of some of the trends and challenges and opportunities that we've just talked about, what's your plan and what are you seeing?
Thank you, Chairman. Actually, myself come from China Tianqian Engineering Corporation. We do the EPC, especially in the petrochemical power sections. Actually, for all the chemical and the petrochemical project, the energy is the keys. As we know, it's well established the fact that the oil play very critical roles in the booming, the economic development in the industry countries, and especially for the transforming the energy and the power section, and also hastening technology innovation, also increase the productive in the last century. But I think in the coming century, I believe the natural gas play more important roles for the industry, also for power sections. It's not only give the very clean and green solutions, but also have the very low carbon emissions. It's better, I think, for the country like Georgia. It also is established a feature to bridge the European country and the Asia, so supply the natural gas to secure the European countries' natural gas energy securities. According to our information, we know that natural gas will provide almost 25% energy consumption for EU roadmap 2050. Also, according to the report from the ExxonMobil, in the International Energy Outlook 2040, the global energy reserve will be 25%. Of course, the oil consumption still is the largest, the biggest portion, the reserve to the 30%. But the gas is the fastest growth, is reserve to 40%. So why the natural gas worldwide is essentials? There's figures in 2012. The total consumption of energy from natural gas is around 123 billion cubic feet. But it coming to 2040s, the consumption will be up to the 203 3 billion cubic feet. And the power, if we talk about in the electrical power generation sections, It will have the high heat value and with a high efficiency, power efficiency, and low carbon emission. And it also encourages the country like China, Georgia, to based on the sustainable development and replace, especially in China, many energy is based on the coal. But owing to the international requirement, so we also should use the natural gas to replace the coal and other liquid fuels. Because right now we have a project execute in Georgia, so we also carefully study this market. Georgia actually along the Silk Road is a ground initiative together with China. So we believe that Georgia will play a very important role in this region. Right now we built Gadbani project. It's a combined cycle power project for our customer GOGC in Georgia. So this is a combined cycle power project. Because you know, in Georgia they also have good resources for hydropower, but this is a season power generation, especially in winter. There's some power shortage owing to the more high power consumption in winter, and also some hydropower will be shut down. So we built this power project will be increased the power security for Georgia, and also this is very flexible because this power plant will build the black start systems. In case the whole grid will be shut down, this black system will be support the whole plant to automatically start without all the power feeding. Secondly, this power project also will give many work job opportunity to local people. Actually, I think for the energy section, the skillful engineer and professional workers are also very important. So by doing the project, and also can improve the skillful and professional workers and technicians in these fields. So in the future, for engineering company like TCC, we would like also use our technology, our financial support, and also life cycle solutions to give support to our customer and partner in Georgia and other countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Wang. It's always good to get the corporate and the business perspective, and some very interesting observations there on upskilling, which we also heard from Yasha. Let me follow up with some more sort of specific follow-up questions, and I'll turn, if I may, back to you, David, just sort of picking out some of the themes that have emerged, perhaps unsurprisingly. Talk first a little bit about, I mean, you talked about cross-border trading, and you talked about connectivity and collaboration. Talk a little bit about the benefits and perhaps some of the challenges of an open energy market, and then also perhaps some thoughts on what we're hearing about climate change and sustainability.
Thank you for the question. Yes, the market, I just want to highlight from the very beginnings that we are committed, fully and absolutely committed to establishing an open market, open energy market in Georgia. Well, you know, we have started this process. We have started the reforms. There are already some companies, big companies, consumer companies, and they are pushed to the market, and they have to take care of buying electricity without buying it from the ESCO, the operator of the market. But what we are going to do is to try to copy. Maybe it's not the right word to copy, but I will use this word, to copy, I mean, all the attributes of the European open market, energy markets. Yeah, and this year and the end of this year is quite significant on that development, because before the end of this year we are going to adopt, I mean, the Parliament is going to adopt a new new energy law. By the way, 2 days ago it was adopted by first hearing by the Parliament of Georgia, and shortly we will have it in 1 month, this new law. So what this law is going to, what will change is, so it will create a new landscape, a new environment for the energy market, I mean the electricity market and the natural gas market mainly. And the law specifies the players on that market and the rights and obligations of all these players. We are going to unbundle the whole system. There should be no monopoly. There should be no, interference to the market, and there'll be a special mechanism how to ensure it. And in addition to that, in 1 year's time, I think we hope by the beginning of 2021, we will introduce this electricity platform where all these market players will trade, and this will be in line with what we have now in the European Union. By the way, this electronic platform we bought is used in Scandinavia. It's a platform developed by Nord Pool. Yes, and we think that this was also a requirement of the association agreement that Georgia signed with the European Union. But the law is not adopted because this is our obligation to adopt this law, because we need this law, we need these changes, we need these reforms to open the market, to have the transparent market, to have transparent and competitive prices in the energy sector. We hope that in 3-4 years' time we'll have a totally different environment in our system. And in addition to that, by introducing this new market, an open market, we will provide investors, future investors in the energy sector, predictability, and that will enable them to invest in our country with more comfort. That's one thing, one question you asked, and the second question was about sustainability. I mean, yes. Of course, many people know in this room that Georgia is a unique country in this regard, because more than 80% of our generation comes from renewable energy, from water in this case. But the consumption rises and increases significantly in Georgia, along with the economic developments, and we have to somehow keep up with that. Shall I continue? Okay, yes. Of course, we need to develop, that's why, internal resources. Unfortunately, we don't have natural gas in this country, so we need to develop our resources. This is wind, solar, and of course, water in this case. We only use only third our potential in this water sector. That's why we need to develop this kind of projects, and we think that by adopting a new law, which we are doing right now, working on that, this renewable energy source and renewable energy law, we will support this kind of development. We will provide incentives to renewable energy projects, including financial incentives. I'm not talking about these hydropower plants, but we also have some potential in the development of wind and solar generation as well. And we also hope that in Georgia, quite soon we will introduce this energy efficiency concept, and it will be backed by specific legislation. It's a long process, but we are working on that. So what I just want to sum up. The second question is that Georgia is mainly a country which produces electricity from renewable energy sources, and we are going to continue it by introducing a specific support mechanism for this kind of project in future. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. That's very clear. Let me switch gears and turn back to you, Jascha, if I may, and Werner touched on it in terms of some of the sort of technological disruption in your strategic framework of people and competencies and the right products and technologies and platforms. Technology clearly is generating new solutions, opportunities, but can sometimes face competition in terms of funding against some of the more established technologies when you're looking to demonstrate commercial viability. How do we build business confidence in your sector in investing in new technology and projects whilst at the same time minimizing the sort of commercial risk?
Yeah, thank you. Innovation coupled with competition is a driving force of the progress. And the only, or probably the best way to innovation is investment into research and development. Again, coming to Azerbaijan's oil and gas industry, and in particular with SOCAR at the helm of it, we are not trying to kind of address the global problems of the oil and gas industry, but we do have our own fit-for-purpose challenges and opportunities which are typical. It's almost when you talk about the field development, it's almost dealing with the human body, which has got its own specificity and its own fit-for-purpose considerations. So we are addressing those issues, and we believe that it represents a huge opportunity for ourselves and also for the region. I will just give you an example that Azerbaijan is a cradle of the oil industry with the first onshore production starting over 170 years ago, and first offshore production in our legendary field, which is called Oil Rocks, which started exactly 70 years ago. We are going to have a celebration on the 7th of November, the 70th anniversary of first offshore production anywhere in the world, and the first one was in the Caspian Sea. You can imagine, 7th of November 1949, just 4 years after the end of the World War II. And the science shows that the oil recovery rate in the best developed fields amounts maximum to 50 and 55%, which means that 45 or 50% of residual oil is stayed under the ground. I mean, of course, renewable energy, solar, wind, wave, I mean, it will say its own word in the history, but when we look at the residual oil reserves, the innovation and technological progress represents an unprecedented opportunity to extract more wealth for the benefit of all the stakeholders in an environmentally compliant and safe manner. And we believe that the collaboration and cooperation and great partnership that we have got with service industries, GE, Solar, ABB, Honeywell, Halliburton, Schlumberger, Baker Hughes, they will say its own word, and kind of collaboration is a key word here. But when we look at the corporate oil and gas business, of course the 4G era represents a unique opportunity as well, and we can see it and feel it, and actually it relates to what I said earlier, that it's a time when the physics and mechanics-based engineering or technology approaches are necessary things, but not sufficient anymore. We need to supplement it with the big data, with the cognitive analysis, with cloud elastic computing, with Internet of Things, with machine learning and artificial intelligence. And with this in mind, we are doing big steps together with IBM, with SAP-based tools and approaches. And at the same time, there's an expression by Bill Gates. I'm going back to the processes and procedures, that automation of the inefficient processes multiplies inefficiency, but automation of the efficient processes multiplies efficiency. So it's also a challenge, but also a great opportunity for us to go back and look into our processes and procedures to make them kind of shoot 10 out of 10, because 9 out of 10 is not necessarily the right thing, and grow more innovative and grow more competitive with those approaches.
Thank you very much indeed again. Let me switch back to you, Ada, and I liked your sort of 3 goals of security, sustainability and affordability as sort of defining success. And as part of that process at the EBRD, clearly part of that strategy is diversification. And that would seem to sort of play into what we were hearing from David in terms of interconnectivity, collaboration between some of the main stakeholders, whether they be governmental or corporate. What else can we be doing? I mean, you've got a unique perspective over there at the EBRD across regions. What else can we be doing to drive precisely that?
Yep. Again, if I may, I'll give an answer in 3 parts. For us, energy security comes down to diversification of resources. We financed the Southern Gas Corridor, a project of European significance, as part of diversification attempt of bringing alternative sources of gas to Europe. For us, the second part would be the interconnection, which is again closely relates to the energy security situations in any specific country individually, but also regionally. And there we are big champions of integrated approaches, of interconnections, of regional trade. CASA 1000 project in Central Asia that is bringing clean hydro energy from Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, from Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan to South Asia, North Pakistan, via Afghanistan, is one of the projects that we participated in as well. So diversification of resources, moving away from entrenched things like coal in Kazakhstan, which is still about 80% of coal mix there, but we are pushing again the renewables agenda very actively, and up at 600 megawatt solar capacity in Kazakhstan, where they actually don't, I mean, on the surface, they don't need that. But it was made possible due to the political will, so we were pushing there. Another interconnection is, of course, Georgia, the country we're in now, connection to Turkey, which we also financed, which allows the country to take advantage of the prices in another country. And of course, the whole renewables agenda is closely intertwined with the intermittency issue, and that's again best solved through the connections, through the interconnections. The third part of my answer was something that we haven't touched, but also, in our view, relates to energy security in the longer term. So we want to take a longer term outlook. And there's an issue of stranded assets, and that's why we in EBRD haven't financed a single coal-fired power project since 2013. This is why we are very selective with any fossil fuel project. We have, since this year, introduced shadow carbon pricing on anything we do, so we see the carbon cost of our projects. And there, it's an issue of whether to build a carbon-intensive asset now, and run the risk, and then the risk, security risk, the financial risk of this asset becoming stranded 5-10 years down the road, or having another strategy. And it really varies from country to country, from region to region, but these are the 3 main aspects for energy security from our perspective.
Thank you very much indeed. Let me go back to you, Werner. You talked about the overarching strategy and some of the sort of core planks of that. Go a little bit deeper in terms of supporting energy sector development over at ADB, and a little bit more on that strategy.
Sure. So, I mean, energy goes into many dimensions, as I mentioned earlier. ADB has a corporate strategy. We call it Strategy 2030, and that actually has now a theme-based approach. And there are two themes that are particularly relevant for energy. One is climate change, and the second one is regional integration. So these are core objectives of the bank, where energy plays a main role. We then have operational plans for key sectors. So we do have an operational plan for the energy sector. And then we have country strategies. So the core strategies and the operational plans are translated into country strategies and then into specific initiatives, investment initiatives. For the energy sector as a whole, of course, we really look at the whole value chain. We look at the generation, we look at the transmission, we look at the distribution, we look at systemic sustainability aspects, and we look at innovation. So I think generally, on the generation side, the approach of the bank is that this is really something for the private sector to come in. We need to make sure there is a good investment environment, but generation, generally, you try to get the private sector involved. It gets a bit more challenging if you want to get them off the mainstream type of project. So, I mean, they're all familiar with the traditional even hydropower plants, gas-fired plants, turbines, that's kind of mainstream. But you want to go more technological things. One thing we try to do is actually to pilot things. Things may have worked elsewhere in the world, but not yet in this region. So take, for instance, geothermal for heating. I mean, you have Iceland, where that is quite prevalent. We have a potential in Kazakhstan. How can we actually help to introduce those technologies in a wider scale in the region? And so what we'll try to do, we partner up. There is a bit of a distrust between the investors and the client because they haven't really worked together yet. So a partner like ADB who understands both parties well, we try to bridge it, come in as an equity investor or as a lender, and that gives a bit of comfort. We also have guarantee instruments, by the way, that we try to bring. So what we'll try to do is when we look at the generation, we don't finance traditional power projects, but we really try to go more cutting edge and try to actually introduce technologies that may exist elsewhere but haven't been scaled up in the region, may introduce this. By the way, we helped doing this in wind in Pakistan. The first wind projects in Pakistan were done with the assistance of ADB. And then subsequently, once the investors become more comfortable, we're no longer needed. We're now trying to do that with solar in Afghanistan. It's obviously a very challenging market. The private sector isn't really attuned to go there, but we are quite confident that with the help of ADB, we can actually bring these partners in there. So that's what we're doing at the generation side. Distribution, really, we see also a big role for the private sector in distribution. There's huge investment requirements that are needed. I think there, again, an issue is policy stability. To operate the distribution network, you obviously need to have clear policies in place, and those policies shouldn't be changed too much. So again, I think ADB as an investment partner brings some of that confidence. Transmission is potential for private sector, but generally less private sector driven. So there I see more of a role of the public sector. And in particular, when you try to do cross-border transmission systems. I had mentioned, for instance, the CARTHA 1000 project. That is a good example of a cross-border transmission project. We are working on other cross-border transmission projects. We're just about to ink an agreement between Uzbekistan and Afghanistan. You have energy in Uzbekistan. So yes, it's very difficult to build it in Afghanistan. So why don't we take surplus energy from Uzbekistan and make it available in Afghanistan? But obviously such cross-border projects are a little bit more complex. And so a role for an organization like the ADB can be quite helpful. In the gas sector, I think there's also a huge potential in the gas sector, largely neglected in the past, very inefficient sectors. If you look at Uzbekistan, at Kazakhstan, I think there is a big big potential to upgrade those networks. We're also working on regional projects like the TAPI pipeline. This is a gas pipeline from Turkmenistan through Afghanistan and Pakistan all the way to India. Again, such projects could never be realized without unifying partners such as the ADB or World Bank or EBRD or whoever it is. So these are some of the things where we think by coming in, we really add value to the mix. It's not just about providing the money, it's about providing the comfort and also the policy dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Werner. Wang, let me come to you. Two of the many themes that we're hearing quite a lot about is, first of all, renewables, steady rise of ESG parameters, some uncertainty in terms of national protectionism, which obviously David has called for better regional collaboration, but there is some of that around. How do we, in that operating environment, continue to grow opportunities for new projects and ensure they're financially viable? And let me also just sort of throw in the confidence aspect that we were just talking about from Werner. What else do we need in terms of confidence to drive new technologies and projects?
Yeah, actually now, frankly speaking, it's more challenging and tough to get new projects in the engineering market. But I believe we're still struggling to do our work jobs to get the new opportunities. Of course, some key factors like the technology innovation, improve your technology qualified, and make your price more competitive. And this is some of the technical factors. But in general speaking, I think actually, for instance, now Georgia has the forum for the Silk Road. Actually, China have Belt and Road Policy initiative. Actually, these two initiatives respond positively each other. So I think that is from society or from the concept, it should be compliant with each other. For protection, actually, in short term, it may be taken effective, but the long-term view, I believe the globalization and the mutual understanding is still the key. Forget the project. So we think the communications and cooperations generally should be encouraged. Secondly, is build the trust and confidence, especially for international projects, whatever in power section or in the oil and gas sections. The trust and the confidence is also the case. Another factor I think is benefit shared and enjoy together. For a project, you could not say only one party is the winners. So normally, I think not only the contract, but the owners and even the bankers, financing institutions, and employees. So all the parties become the win-win situation. So this is also is a concept, of course, for environmental protection, improve the energy utilization efficiency, also the key factors. But I believe with the hard work and keep on opening up and reforming, we still have more opportunity in the engineering fields. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed for that. Let me have a look at the polling question. Can we bring up the polling question? I don't know where we're talking about disruptive technology. I don't know if the disruptive technology is able to bring up. There we go. So that was the question. Can we see the answer? The percentages? Oh, they just need a couple of minutes. Okay, so whilst they do that, let me, well, first of all, thank our panelists, but let me also just try and pull together some of the thoughts. There was a huge amount to discuss and debate, and I'm very grateful to all of the panelists, very different perspectives, but some real coalescing around what appear to be some real key themes. The first one is, which I think David started with, which is the need for regional cooperation and collaboration, and that can take a number of different forms and dimensions. It can be regional, it can be around the system connectivity. Werner was talking about that regional approach and that regional collaboration, but also connectivity and a joined-up approach on terms of the policy framework. So I think that overarching theme of connectivity amongst stakeholders, amongst regions, amongst actors, very much coming through. I think also clearly climate change and sustainability and the way in which, here we go, so political. That would have got my vote, I have to say. 77, and economic at 14 and physical 9. Any observations from any of our panelists on that? Any surprises?
Well, it's, I'm not surprised, but I say that I would have preferred to have a more equal distribution probably, or maybe more on the economic side of things. But it just shows how this huge region, the region of Eurasia, is still susceptible to the political, and how important those political factors are. But they're also very closely linked to issues like interconnections.
Yeah.
So if countries are good neighbors, there's a common interest in having sustainable and secure supply of energy, common system potentially, mutually beneficial arrangements in terms of supply of power to offset intermittency in some regions. So the political factor could have been lower in my view.
Well, I don't think it's just Eurasia. I've just come from London. Geopolitics are challenging us wherever we are, so I'm also not surprised it's that high. Any other thoughts or observations? I think, Werner, you...
I think I mirror those observations. I thought politicalists probably would have gotten my vote there, but a narrow vote, because I do think that the other aspects are also very, very important, and maybe they're a bit overlooked, but even the physical aspects are actually not to be underestimated. I mean, you talked about the building of a transmission line through very mountainous regions, sometimes high altitude. There are some physical challenges. Economics definitely come into play. And so I do think, I mean, a bit more balanced view would have been probably, but then many people may have thought like me. They probably only have one button to press, and then probably that's the one you press, and so you end up with the majority of political. But I do think all factors are important.
Yeah, I think you could have only picked one. Any other thoughts, observations, comments? Wang?
Actually, I think is the factor combining. But if I make selection, I select also economic. I just take an example of China. For example, in China, now they have plenty of coal, but shortage of the natural gas. Also shortage of the oil. Of course, the political will affect. But I believe the economic also is a very important key factors. Now, actually, for us, China, we have some technology from coal to orifin, actually to make it secured about in case of some protection, we can use our coal to produce some oil and orifin. So if you have enough strength, economic strength, so I think you can develop some new technologies. I believe the economic is the basis. Of course, political is upper structure, architecture also critical. Yeah.
No, I'm not surprised. We are here in Georgia, and we are in this region, so nobody in this room is surprised. But if it was done in the UK, maybe the result was different. I don't know. I don't know. So yes, that's logical. Yes, and these energy issues, these cross-border trading issues, are very much related to politics, to regional politics. So I'm not surprised. So I expected this result. Thank you.
Just one more observation. Political, I think, is actually a very big word, and for me, it summarizes a couple of sub-components that are all lumped together, and it could be like, I mean, regulatory independence, the political stability of regimes, regulatory regimes, but perhaps also the word we don't like to mention, but which is still there, which is corruption. Is that an issue? I mean, probably it's kind of subsumed somewhere. So it might have been interesting to segment this a bit further, but because it really is a big word.
Well, I think we've learned some lessons for the next panel. But I think if there are no further questions or comments or observations, I'm just going to close the summary of the various the themes. We talked about collaboration and connectivity across the system. We've talked about sustainability and climate change. I really like the trilemma of affordability, security and sustainability, which I think all of our expert panelists really addressed in a deep and insightful way. So thank you to all of our distinguished guests. Thank you all for coming. But let me also thank the Georgian government for their absolutely fantastic hosting and organisation. And thanks to all for an absolutely excellent panel. Thank you very much indeed.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. The panel will start shortly.
Theory. ერთი ორი ერთი ორი ერთი ორი ერთი ორი ერთი ორი ერთი ორი ბექა ერთი ორი კარგია ერთი ორი მოგესალმებით ხალხო ერთი ორი ერთი ორი ერთი ორი დინო გამარჯობათ
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. The panel will start shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. The panel will start shortly.
1-1-1-2-1-2-3-1-2-3-4-5-6-7.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. The panel will start shortly.
ერთი, ორი, სამი, ოთხი, ხუთი, ექვსი, შვიდი. ერთი, ორი, სამი, ოთხი, ხუთი, ექვსი, შვიდი. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. The panel will start shortly.
1 2 3 4 5 6 7.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. The panel will start shortly.
Yeah. Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. I would like to welcome all of you to the Silk Road Knowledge Dialogue within Tbilisi Silk Road Forum. I would like to thank, first of all, host country Georgia for organizing this nice and also effective Silk Road Forum, and also letting us have a dialogue on very important issue of knowledge sharing, and partnership on this. My name is Iskandar Abdullayev. I am Deputy Director of CAREC Institute, Urumqi, China. I would like to start this our dialogue giving floor to Mr. Xixin Chen, ADB Vice President, to give us a keynote speech. Let me introduce Mr. Xixin Chen, who is the Vice President of Asian Development Bank, responsible for operations in South Asia Department and Central and West Asia Department. Mr. Chen headed the Department of International Economic and Financial Cooperation in the Ministry of Finance of People's Republic of China, and was World Bank's Executive Director for PRC from 2013 till 2016. Also, Mr. Chen was Board Director for PRC in New Development Bank and Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank from 2016 to 2018. Mr. Chen holds PhD in Economics from Graduate School of Research Institute for Fiscal Science and Master in Public Policy Management from John Kennedy School of Government in Harvard University. Mr. Chen, the floor is yours and your deliberations. Thank you.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you, everyone, for this afternoon's discussion. So first of all, Deputy Ministers, Mr. Akiki Saakashvili, and Mr. Sukharabo Medzozodeba, distinguished panelists, session moderator, Dr. Iskandar Abdullayev, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I would like to extend this best wish. I'm delighted to be a part of this Silk Road Knowledge Dialogue. This morning, in the inaugural session of the forum, I noted the importance of building knowledge corridors to complete transport and economic corridors as a means to promote sustainable development in a region. And I'm also very pleased to now expand on this issue. The world today is racing into a new age, which Professor Klaus Schwab, founder of executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, calls for the fourth industrial revolution. After mechanization and the invention of the steam engine, mass production with the advent of electricity and the digital revolution in which we have been widespread availability of electronic and IT systems and automation. The fourth industrial revolution is driven largely by the convergence of digital, biological, and physical innovation. Knowledge is the basis of all these phases of innovation. It is a critical driver of growth, productivity, and efficiency. I consider knowledge and technology-based interventions such as national single windows, e-commerce, and paperless trade, and smart grids, and sustainable transportation systems to be indispensable for realizing the full potential of global and regional economic cooperation. How do our country, our society fare among these giant waves of innovation and knowledge? While there are few countries that are at the leading edge, many countries, including those along the Silk Road, are lagging here. We need more progress on adoption of new technologies, including those supported the artificial intelligence, IT systems, and digital connectivity. So taking this opportunity, I'd like to strike on the four issues. First, the importance of the knowledge-based cooperation among the regional cooperation platforms. Regional cooperation initiatives such as the Central Asia Regional Economic Cooperation Program, we call it CAREC, and it's a knowledge arm. The CAREC Institute are geared towards expanding the horizons of knowledge and innovation in a region. The second Belt and Road Forum held in April this year also stressed the importance of taking advantage of the fourth industrial revolution to foster new growth drivers, build the digital Silk Road and the Silk Road of innovation, and carry out regional cooperation in innovation, science, and technology. The forum agreed on the need to promote mutual learning among different cultures, deepen people-to-people and culture cooperation, and facilitate the people-to-people exchanges. I'm of the view that a synergistic approach between the CAREC, BRI, and other platforms is vital to deliver on the promise of knowledge and innovation as key drivers of economic cooperation in this region. My second point is that knowledge corridors for stronger regional economic cooperation and integration. The focus on the Silk Road has traditionally been centered on the connectivity in terms of transport and trade. I believe that it is now time to recognize that connectivity of ideas and intellectual discourse and the exchange of knowledge and innovation are equally critical to raise the productivity and the competitiveness of our economies. Therefore, knowledge corridors have to be developed side by side with transport corridors to carry ideas and innovations across borders and share the policy perspectives and prescriptions on common challenges. By allowing unfettered trading of ideas, conceptions, and analysis along the knowledge corridors, we can promote specializations in our centers of learning based on the competitive advantages. This type of connectivity is clearly not only physical, it is also virtual and increasingly digital. As generators of ideas and innovation approaches, Knowledge Corridor can bring a new vitality to transport corridors and raise their performance to cut the time, costs, and efforts for travel, transit, and logistics. What does this take to build knowledge corridors? We need first and foremost high-level ownership by the governments. We need a committed and dedicated knowledge institutions such as universities, think tanks, and research centers that are capable and willing to enter into across-the-board partnerships with peer institutions. We need openness and the capacity to exploit the power of knowledge, as well as we need to connect institutions that have a mandate to work across borders and the power to bring the regionals, knowledges, organizations, and institutes to the same table. My third point, I want to say a little bit about the role of the Carrick Institute, which is today's the host. Carrick Institute is the one such institution. Its role is to provide value-adding knowledge solutions for member countries of the Carrick program and to promote active cooperation among research and the knowledge institutes in the region. The Carrick Institute has established a regional think tank forum and is promoting collaborative research on key development issues and challenges. It produces flagship knowledge products and supports capacity building programs for the countries along the Silk Road. ADB is a strong supporter of the Carrick Institute. Now comes to my last point, Knowledge Alliance for the Silk Road Corridor. I propose a Knowledge Alliance for the countries along the Silk Road based on the principles of knowledge and data sharing and collaboration on high-quality research and analytical and policy-based work. The Carrick Institute and the other nations and the regional institutions can coordinate to work out this alliance by creating a common platform for knowledge exchanges, such as an information gateway or portal. This can be a wide window facility that provides access to information, data, statistics, and research in countries along the Silk Road, relevant to promoting economic cooperation in the region. Such an alliance can facilitate and incentivize joint analytical and knowledge work. It can create conferences and seminars to bring together policymakers and researchers to deliberate on key challenges confronting the region. So, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, the Silk Road Knowledge Corridor can be a key vehicle to accelerate and expand economic cooperation in the region. It can promote research and knowledge generation on the connectivity, trade, tourism, and other key regional concerns. It can convene research and knowledge institutions to work on contemporary development issues. Most importantly, I think the Knowledge Corridor can promote open discussions and cross-fertilization of ideas and intellect to drive actions on the regional cooperation. So with that, I wish you all the fruit discussions today, and thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chen. I think you set up very good context for our further dialogue and discussion. Indeed, knowledge corridors can be visualized as an interconnected web of virtual destinations, ideas, thoughts. Therefore, knowledge enablers like governments, and knowledge articulators, sector experts and researchers, knowledge generators, research entities, and knowledge transformers, business sector, could translate knowledge into tangible gains. Now we have to discuss how this idea of knowledge corridors could be harnessed and how we can utilize its potential, develop directions for joint work. To discuss these issues, I am honored to have 6 panelists today, and I will invite them by to this stand, and we then have questions prepared to discuss exactly these aspects of knowledge corridors. My pleasure and also honor to invite Mr. Akaki Sagirashvili, Deputy Minister of Economy and Sustainable Development of Georgia. Mr. Sagirashvili is Deputy Minister of Economy and Sustainable Development of Georgia since 1st of October 2018. He had a long-term career with Georgian Railway Company, including Head of Corporate Management Department, Deputy Director for Infrastructure Branch, Head of Legal Services, and Advisor to Executive Director. Mr. Sagirashvili holds Masters of Civil Law degree from Faculty of Law, Tbilisi State University, and Master of Civil Law from Bonn University, Germany. Our second panelist is Mr. Sukhrab Mirzazoda, First Deputy Minister, Minister of Transport of Republic of Tajikistan. Mr. Mirzazoda is First Deputy Minister since 2015. Mr. Mirzazoda has outstanding career of more than 30 years in transport and road sector in Tajikistan and globally. He headed Department of Construction, Reconstruction of Roads and Bridge in Dushanbe, was Director of Autostrada Company, Manager in Road Projects in Tunisia, Deputy General Inspector for Transport Inspection and Project Coordinator with Ministry of Transport of Republic of Tajikistan. Mr. Mirzazoda, welcome to the center. Third panelist, we have Taleh Ziadov, Director General, Port of Baku, Azerbaijan. Dr. Ziadov serves as the Director General of Port of Baku by appointment of President of Azerbaijan since 2014. Dr. Ziadov has extensive knowledge of issues related to transport, logistics, and supply chain management in the Caspian region. Since 2008, he has advised private and public companies, as well as international organizations, on matters of transport and logistics in Azerbaijan and Greater Central Asian region. Dr. Ziadov holds master's degree from School of Foreign Services of Georgetown University and PhD degree from Cambridge University. He is author of the book Azerbaijan as Regional Hub in Central Eurasia. Our next panelist, Dr. Tamar Sulkhia, Director, International School of Economics at Tbilisi State University. Dr. Sulkhia was World Bank's Sustainable Development and Infrastructure Program Leader for Turkey in Ankara and Sustainable Development Program Leader for Ukraine, Belarus, and Moldova. Dr. Sulkhia served as the Minister for Infrastructure and Development of Georgia in 2014, and also she was head of Local Governance Center of Georgian Institute of Public Affairs in Tbilisi. She is an author of a number of publications on urban planning and governance. Dr. Sulkhia holds PhD in urban planning from Georgian Technical University, Tbilisi, Georgia. Our next panelist, Dr. Sohail Naqvi, Rector, University of Central Asia. Professor Sohail Naqvi is Rector of University of Central Asia. He served as Vice Chancellor of Lahore University of Management Science, prior joining the university in Central Asia. Dr. Naqvi has extensive teaching, research, and entrepreneurial experience both in US and Pakistan, and has also been consultant of higher education for ADB and World Bank. He was awarded Order of Palms Academics with rank of Cavalier by French government, and also he have a recognition from government of Pakistan. Dr. Naqvi earned his bachelor degree, master degree, and PhD degree in electrical engineering from Purdue University, US. And our next panelist, Dr. Siddharth Saxena, Chair of Central Asia Forum, Cambridge University. Dr. Saxena is chairperson of the Cambridge Central Asia Forum, director of Cambridge Kazakhstan Center, and honorary secretary of Committee for Central and Inner Asia. Dr. Saxena has been involved in field-based research in Central Asia, Caucasus, Russia, and China, focusing on creation of scientific and industrial technology platforms and studying social and economic development in Central Asia and neighboring regions. Dr. Saxena was also awarded a medal for service to education in Kazakhstan, presidential medal by Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. All panelists are now welcome to the stand, and if you allow, I will take also seat together with panelists to continue our discussion on 4 questions related to our talk today. First of all, I would like to thank all of you coming in. Then start discussions. First question which I would like to ask each panelist to give is about an effective support of knowledge corridors. How knowledge corridors will support and to understand what region. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all of you to being here. Well, actually, as for missing opportunities, what we have and how we can solve the problems what we face, I think the smart solutions is the future of the corridors. Currently in Georgia, and a lot of countries implement studies. They have conducted a lot of research how to improve the efficiency in the corridors. And digitalization is one of the best solutions. If we want to improve e-commerce, this is the best way to focus and capitalize on these solutions. Actually, we don't have to invent the bicycle. The solutions already exist. Simply, we have to combine our efforts. We should create common platform for businesses, for services, for state services to combine under one umbrella. And even effort of one country is not enough. Whole countries of the corridor should be combined, and today I had the opportunity to have a talk with my colleagues from other countries, and they are also very much interested in having this kind of solutions. So digitalization, I think this is the most important part, corridor management system to have implemented, and as you know, transport and logistics is a key and driver of the economy. If we want to have significant growth of the economy, we should develop also this soft infrastructure together with the hard infrastructure, which is also very critical, and I do hope other countries also have and spend a lot of money and invest in hard infrastructure as well. But in this component, I would highlight as a backbone of this success, this is digitalization. Thank you.
Thank you. I would approach this question from a rather historical perspective, because if we are talking about knowledge corridor, that means there is an assumption that there is a corridor through which knowledge travels, yes? So in the past, this knowledge transfer used to be in big cities, what we call caravansarais, yes? In the ancient times, and a couple of them are actually in Georgia, still in Azerbaijan, Bukhara, Samarkand, and all big cities, Baghdad, they used to act as hubs or megapolises of knowledge transfer. So all this knowledge was transferred through caravans, ancient caravans. And the same way, obviously, we have to analyze the 21st century Silk Way. And now the question is how you are going to transfer the knowledge and how well you are transferring this knowledge. And today we are sitting at the Silk Road Forum, and we are discussing the 21st century Silk Road. And obviously what Deputy Minister suggested, digitalization is the key to successful Silk Road in the 21st century. That means a container leaving China should put into this computer or an iCloud system the information, and we already in Baku or in Poti should be informed about this container, the content of it, when it's going to arrive to our port and arrive to Poti and further on. And the challenge, obviously, is to make sure that we kind of integrate into this system. So there are a lot of players en route from China to Europe. And the question, obviously, we are going to discuss today, how we are going to make sure that that knowledge is being transferred and new hubs are created.
All right, I will also go back in time and look at history, but I think that we need to do a lot more and perhaps be learning from our history. If we're talking about Silk Route, then knowledge transfer was basically a human transfer. There was a person going from one place to another. And as was alluded to, that they were centers of learning. So you had, let's say, Rumi, who is going to originate from, and I hope I don't cause a controversy here, but in any case, I believe some part in Tajikistan, and then make his way down to Afghanistan, then move, of course there was no borders over there, then move to Uzbekistan. And what they were in search was for a teacher. And you went from one place to another. Now, if we were to look at today and say, what is the digital Silk Route? I would say that that basic element of the teacher and the student and the human connection is still very much going to be there. Without the human interaction, as is happening in this conference all the time, in the corridor over a cup of coffee, there is no substitute. We could have digitized all of this thing. We could have been meeting on Zoom or Skype or any one of these endless video solutions, but that is not a substitute. That handshake, that meeting, that sparks it. After that, technology comes in as a force multiplier. So I would say that the most critical and important ingredient in a knowledge corridor is the allowance for the movement of knowledge workers, all those involved in with the ability to use knowledge, generate knowledge, apply knowledge, the student, the teacher, the researcher. They are allowed that free movement. And then the next question will come, well, what are the systems that will facilitate and allow knowledge to proliferate and to address problems that are of issue? And I think that the recent last few decades of experience of the European Union are very illustrative, in which they focused first, one of the pillars of the scientific research programs that they developed was mobility. And they said that the people have to move from one place, they have to allow that. And then they created all kinds of programs. And I believe that there is a lot that we could do in replicating them, and perhaps later on we can expand upon that.
Спасибо вам большое. Действительно, сегодня...
Thank you very much. Yes, corridor of knowledge are very key elements in our strategy. We allocate assets to improve the physical corridor, and we believe this question that was raised, it was very important, and in future we can exchange our knowledge and that is very necessary factor. As for the corridors, they promote better understanding. When we speak about the movements and the cargo movements, we need digitalization, we need knowledge, we need software, and of course we need in every country to cooperate closely with each other, to cooperate with CAREC Institute, and we need to develop strategy, software, and allocate that resource to foster and facilitate the programs that are on agenda in every country. Today in Tajikistan, we cooperate closely with other countries, and when we have projects, we focusing on the issue how to improve the potential for knowledge expansion. And to address this issue in this area, we take every effort to tackle the problems as they arise, and I do believe that in the framework of this forum and the forum itself is a very good platform to discuss all these questions. And I believe in future this kind of forums and CAREC and those countries that are involved in all these projects will cooperate and collaborate very closely, and Caucasus is also part of TRESEC project. We will take every effort to cooperate and collaborate with Georgia and other countries.
Thank you very much. My pleasure to be part of this distinguished panel. I will probably echo some of the ideas already voiced by my colleagues, whether from the government or from universities and think tanks. I think a few messages that I want to make will be mostly focused on a sort of a soft side of the knowledge. It was voiced that knowledge corridors are a sort of equation of infrastructure, equation with digital, but let me cover the soft side of it. So if we look at a historic Silk Road, as already was mentioned, information was traveling with person or commodity, physically accompanying either person or commodity, and it is obviously not true anymore. But what is quite common and what has not changed, the information remains a key and sustainable comparative advantage. It was a comparative advantage and it remains to be comparative advantage. What is also true is that a travel of information was associated, was sort of bringing with it inspiration for innovation, of progress and productivity. I mean, especially in sort of earlier times, pre-industrial revolution times, or before the transport and IT infrastructure got developed, basically this was true, and this is similarly remains true now. So information was always key for building evidence, and then the evidence which basically builds trust. Trust is absolutely key in economic relations, in trade, in regional cooperation. And basically the information as a soft commodity represents one of the pillars of it, if you wish. Now, while earlier knowledge corridor was very simple in its structure and in its architecture, it was quite slow, spontaneous, sort of limited and primitive web. Now it's a very overwhelming, it's a super relationship, if you wish, between parties, between infrastructures and providers, and it inspires unlimited innovation potential. And therefore, when we're talking about regional cooperation, obviously all these elements come to be key. But in earlier time, currently the chaotic knowledge corridor needs to be structured, and this is exactly the key task. And in dealing with this key challenge, what comes to my mind is role of institutions. My colleague spoke about the role of cities in previous times, in earlier times, in ancient or medieval times, but the role of institutions, even beyond cities, small institutions, and we mentioned few: the government, the academia, the private sector, even development partners and international financial institutions. There is each of them has a very distinguished role, of course. With this, let me perhaps pass to my colleague to continue our discussion.
Thank you so much. I mean, I'm very tempted to follow on, but I'll try to say something what I did want to say, but it was a fantastic set of ideas put forward. I just wanted to reset a little bit, and as well as recast what has been said. So we have the notion of Silk Road in front of us, but it brings, apart from all the positive things we've heard, for the countries on the Silk Road, particularly countries that I've been involved with, or countries of Central Asia and Caucasus and South Caucasus, there's a semantic issue. We talk about how there's a commodity called silk in the east and the market in the west. And in the middle, there is a corridor through which things just pass through. That creates a particular way of thinking that these places are just corridors. They don't contribute other than just a transit. But we just heard a different story, that what was happening in the places of Silk Road, in the countries, in the cities, among the people, is something we need to reconnect to our dialogue and discussion. I'd just like to give a slightly romantic example. Algorithm that was conceptualized and functionalized about 1,000 years ago in Khwarezm, most likely in Bukhara, is something that we agree that gives us what we have everything around us. And I add, with a little bit of bias coming from Cambridge, we discovered the electron about 100 years ago. Combining electron and algorithm really gives us what everything we have. However, did it take 1,000 years to connect these things? Or are there ways in which we can make this happen better and faster? And that's why the previous speaker's idea of structuring the corridors is a very, very important one. So by this, what I mean is it's quite important to take into account what knowledge production is happening within the corridor, not just at the edges of the corridor and passing through. It's an important kind of psychological aspect which helps with decision making. It's essential. But within the knowledge production paradigm, what I like to point out is that what's often forgotten in economic and political analysis, that how the mechanism of this works. There's an algebra of development in our way, using algorithms, other word, algebra here. That science, together with art and music, are principles through which we engage with nature and people around us. That gives us understanding, which is systemized through engineering and processes. Those processes eventually give us innovation. And linking these things to the natural resources, which means both what's in and above the ground, but what walks the ground, the people, the human capital. That connectivity, unless we have very clearly in our mind, we are going to continue to discuss these things in silos. So interconnecting these aspects is very important, and that's where a lot of work in the universities goes on. And I will partly conclude by saying that, with a real example, that knowledge production about, for example, real entities, for downstream petroleum products, plastics and polymers, they have a particular meaning in the global world. We hear about plastics being a problem. But plastics can take a very different value-added meaning in these corridors. Plastic electronics, which means connecting polymers to rare earths, which are here. So the dialogue of plastics and rare earth, as it happens globally, is very different has a very different meaning regionally and on these corridors. So we need to think what is the unique proposition within value chains and supply chains from within the region and how these can have a meaning locally as well as globally. And that can only be done by doing something very specific. This region has seen amazing development, but has also seen amazing disruptions. And what we have today, 30 years after Soviet collapse, generations growing separately. We need generations of specialists, generations of thinkers, generations of doers. We need to find ways of connecting them back together and growing them together. And I think that would make these knowledge corridors a real thing. Thank you.
Human connection, and then cooperation on knowledge, soft side of knowledge. And linking different knowledge generators. These are the words which I picked up, and I think these are the essence of our discussion. But let's continue with the other question, which are also very important to build up and strengthen the knowledge corridors. It is about the roles of different players. And I want to now ask you, please describe the roles of governments, development partners, think tankers, research institutions, and business in building these knowledge corridors. Let's start this time from my left side and with Deputy Minister starting to respond as he represents also government. Please, now it's your turn too.
Конечно, роль правительства здесь.
The role of the government is crucial, and without the government, it's next to impossible to implement of this project, the corridor of knowledge. And as it was said, there should be a clear strategy, there should be clear structure, so that analytical think centers, research institutions, so that they unite their efforts together with CAREC and will channel their efforts in this area together. And the government should and will assist and will allocate appropriate funds. It would be much better to invest funds in this area. Maybe, I think it will be prudent and better that we implement the strategy of CAREC 2030, as we have the system to promote transport. We have strategy regarding gender issues, regarding technologies. So I believe informatics and the knowledge sharing, we should develop a strategy. We focus on these issues, we address these issues, and the government develops and is focusing on developing e-commerce, e-trade, and we also looking forward to make these systems very sophisticated, technologically advanced, as it was mentioned by a colleague. If cargo departs from Georgia, so that we know in which way it goes and the destination of that cargo. So I believe we should have a clear strategy so that it will help us in future to provide regulations and norms.
Thank you. Basically, role of each stakeholder, each party, the government, a private sector, universities, think tanks, development partners, is very distinct in generating knowledge, delivering knowledge to the potential client, where the benefits of this knowledge have to be maximized, and very importantly, in generating and increasing absorptive capacity, because one is to generate knowledge and to deliver knowledge through physical infrastructure, means of connectivity, through a digital sort of infrastructure, but then there needs to be absorptive capacity on the other side. So just to start with, and especially given that I represent university-based think tank, I represent university and the think tank, perhaps let me start from there. Role of universities and think tanks is slightly underestimated, in my view, in the transitional countries, which are sort of transitioning towards the market economy and developing their economies further. So basically, role of universities and think tanks in producing knowledge has to be further facilitated. CAREC Institute was mentioned. Indeed, CAREC provides a very useful floor for think tanks from 11 CAREC countries to exchange knowledge to generate new knowledge. But more is needed. The support of development partners, support of governments is needed in recognizing importance of research, of policy analysis, of sort of comparative studies that could serve beyond one client, beyond one country, that could serve entire region, and this is slightly missing. Of course, it will be very important for universities to, in a way, adapt their curriculums based on the demands from private sector, and I think there should be a greater flexibility on the side of academic institutions to adapt, to respond to the demands of very quick and rapid changes in sort of other side of equation. For instance, our institution, ISET, has recently, a couple of years ago, added a master's concentration in its master's in economic in modern data analysis. I mean, the requirement and popularity of big data and a need for its analysis cannot be underestimated, and therefore adaptability of universities is definitely required. Then, of course, roles of the government are huge in enabling the knowledge movement through favorable regulatory mechanisms, liberal regulatory mechanisms, through provision of infrastructures, through investing in infrastructures, through investing in education, through investing in research and science. And of course, role of development partners is absolutely key to support the government, but also the other players. And then, of course, we spoke about absorption capacity. All these parties will have to invest in providing information, packaging it in a way that enables a private sector to increase its own absorptive capacity for information. That, in my view, would be some sort of a complete a cycle of a movement of knowledge in the knowledge corridor once this is produced and then travels and delivered to the client, which has adequate absorptive capacity.
Thank you. Dr. Saxena, please.
Thank you. I would like to make two connected but different points very briefly. The first thing is that when we look at the geology and geography of the knowledge corridors we're talking about, the overall the Silk Road and the Eurasia region, we're looking at vast differences in many different ways. A lot of huge diversity, which has its own advantages and disadvantages. So one thing that we have seen that particularly in the Eurasia region, whenever countries or empires have become smaller and narrow, they have sought to overcome the natural barriers by creating dialogue or institutions which are supranational. And I think, and that's why we're sitting here today. I mean, we talked about CAREC, there's Eurasian Economic Union, there's BRI, the list is long. And we can go back in history. We can look at whether there were particular empires, the Timurid or Mongol Empire, or so. The region's geography itself generates a need to remain connected. Connectivity is an essential sort of DNA of this region. And that's where the role of government, whatever the kind of governments they are extremely important. They're important for that reason, but from the ground up, there is a particular different story. The diversity in this region, gives that the local and regional institutions are quite diverse, often do not translate each other's motives into productive dialogue. So that's where we need, again, the government role to connect these variety of actors and variety of choices that are generated by natural need of the realm. And I think so in two ways, the ground up, bottom up, the mediation by government is necessary. Everything else about institutions that's been said is something I agree with. And understanding and activating the institutions through a dialogue with government rather than opposition to the government is an important fact to note.
Thank you. Again, going right side and starting with Deputy Minister with you.
Yeah, there is absolutely no doubt that if you want to be competitive on the world market, you should prevail. You should be better than others, right? What is the role of the government? This is it's a very important question because, you know, Georgia and all other countries, I hope here presented, it's a private-driven economies, and sometimes it's not always justified to be involved in processes from the government side. But there are certain cases where government should take a lead and should combine forces. In terms of knowledge sharing, in terms of digitalization, in terms of education systems and programs, definitely we need strong governmental support. First of all, we should identify the priorities, to set up the priorities, and we should listen to the industry. All the programs, we need qualified staff to run the business, right? But we should set up priorities, then we should focus on the industry needs. All the programs should be elaborated in a way to listen to the industry and to benefit. Industry should benefit out of this. As for the involvement of the government to go further with this idea, I think incentive schemes should be also in place. Sometimes not only incentives, but investments and co-investments is needed in order to create value. Whatever we create, for example, and invest in hard infrastructure or soft infrastructure without having qualified staff, it's in vain, right? That's why I think government role is just to stress out priorities. This is how I see the involvement of the government in these processes, together with the private companies, private investments. In a broader scale, we should communicate with other governments, with other entities, in order to be beneficial for all of us.
Thank you. Dr. Ziadov?
With your permission, I will skip this question since previously stated, actually, they highlighted quite well.
Well, I will just first repeat the question. The question was the role of the different institutions in the knowledge corridor. And the knowledge corridor, we're looking at it as two words, knowledge and corridor. Knowledge, we all are understanding, and corridor, we're looking at a pathway. We put something at one end, and that thing comes out at the other end. But I would say that when you're using the word knowledge corridor, it doesn't mean that thing. Because the whole purpose of this knowledge corridor is that what you put in is not what you get out. Every stop, every caravanserai that it will stop at, it will modify and it will change. And that change is the beauty. That is what brings it strength. So it is not like the container, as we were discussing earlier, that arrives at Baku and then just transits across Azerbaijan. That is not going to give much value. And so the question that we were discussing earlier is, what is Azerbaijan going to do that is going to be worth its while? And that is where the whole idea of the knowledge corridor comes in, so that when an algorithm is, let's say, created in Bukhara, and that concept of an algorithm arrives at a Georgian mathematical institute, then it is looking at, well, what are the issues that I am facing? Perhaps it is optimization of hydropower energy generation, or perhaps a Azeri mathematician is working in Georgia and he's looking at the logistics issues of the Baku port. And so that algorithm is then transferred into a solution that then industry picks up. So now in this environment, the different institutions are going to play a different role. This university is a place sort of operating with the only rules of the game being that you are going to take this knowledge and going to push it into directions. Some of it you know, and that is where the industry sponsorship comes in, but I am a very great proponent of the university being free. It is free to think of an idea that perhaps you will not figure it out now, but you'll figure it out 1,000 years later. And then the government is creating this incentivization structure in which different players come to play. And that is where this whole role of innovation and entrepreneurship comes in, which is basically unguided. It is simply incentivized in which humans create solutions. And now the governments will have a challenge that in this multi-country environment, where an Azeri mathematician is working in Georgia, taking parts of an algorithm emanating from Uzbekistan, where is the intellectual property going to lie, how is the benefits going to accrue, and how can we do it so fast that we don't stop the process of innovation. Each institution has a very different role, but this flow of and transformation of ideas is what is going to generate and bring strength into this.
Thank you, Professor. Again, picked up some very important, maybe keywords like investment, cooperation, benefits of knowledge sharing, understanding the role of universities, adapting knowledge, and also cycle of knowledge, differences in diversity in the region and how you can link it, and diversity, variety of actors, private driven economies, how you drive the knowledge in this, change of knowledge while traveling, and also role of universities as free thinkers, and innovation, intellectual property. These are the key words which really fluctuates around, and I think this was the essence of discussion, question number 2. We're just in the middle of our discussion. We came almost in the middle, and time also in the middle, in order not to really letting our panel speakers get bored. I will collect maybe 2-3 questions from the audience, and then continue with the next set of questions. Please, if you would like to have a question to specific panelists, please name the panelists and ask your questions. If it is general question, just ask your question, and then we will decide who will be giving a response. Please, we can collect up to maybe 3 questions. So everyone's so much in. Yes, please. Sir.
And it's been an eye-opener for me. My real question is, who are the users of this information? And do we not, the second part of that, the question, is do we not already, within the private sector, have a lot of information which we're actually talking about now, about the end-to-end movements, what's in those containers, etc. So the shipping lines have invested heavily in IT, and I think a lot of it is what we're talking about.
So this is a very good question. Please, any of panelists could, yes, please.
Thank you for this interesting question. Actually, who should benefit and who are the users of these programs? First of all, let's start from the very beginning. Who are the players here? Customers and users and the service providers. It's a whole chain, right? Let's take in Georgian case. In terms of production, what is the cost of logistic and transport? This is up to more than 20%. Let's compare it with the European one. In Europe, it's up to, I don't know, up to 7, maybe highest rate. So why it's so inefficient in Georgia? Because we don't have smart solutions, we don't have proper infrastructure, we don't have maybe proper people to run this business. So this is a problem, this is a challenge which we have to overcome. Another issue is how to adjust it to the needs and who are the end users. Definitely, you are absolutely right, David, that shipping lines have already invested in it, and I have visited all the dry docks and all the storages in Georgian ports. APM is doing quite well. He has an excellent system of smart solutions, you know, over there. But a couple of kilometers away from this place, I have seen yards where people are seeking containers by hands, not having these solutions, you know. I do not want to name and humiliate some other businesses, but I have seen both in Georgia. That's the problem. So I think that if we combine all this knowledge, and if we share this knowledge and information, if we open our countries, yeah, we will, all of us will benefit out of this. And when the production cost is, for example, less than what we have currently, yeah, then we are competitive in global market, and that would be our competitive advantage in the region. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think it's a very important point to discuss the private sector, which is absolutely critical and crucial at one level, but it is not the picture itself, it's a pixel, a big pixel perhaps. And I'd like to illustrate that by an example, asking who benefits, who cannot benefit, what are the barriers. I'll give you a very narrow, very trivial, in some sense, example. We're sitting in this room here. We have several thermostats and several switches. Each of these things are, of course, it's not high-tech, it's low technology in some sense. However, each of that switch contains a metal called beryllium copper, beryllium bronze in Russian. About 70% of that beryllium copper, which is 98% copper and 2% beryllium, is produced in 3 plants in the world, mostly in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. So it's a metal, it's not ore, it's something that's been brought out, processed into a metal. But its raw value is the question. The question is that countries of Central Asia, which are landlocked and have a particular problem with transporting this globally, end up selling this particular metal for roughly about $10 to $12 a kilo on international market to few companies, who then have the capacity to value add internationally, and they sell it at a global price of about $80 a kilo. if you purify this metal a little bit, and in my laboratory in Cambridge, I buy it for about $500 a kilo, is pure form. So the Kazakh worker, the country, gets about 10. Various people who value it internationally, they get a different price. So part of our discussion is that while this knowledge exists, what can be done to value add locally? I think people talked about that in different ways. And so who are the user who benefits from it is, I think we're inverting the story here. And that is very important because when we look from a private sector perspective, looking at value and supply chains, we have to look at bigger questions. Why we are stuck with certain things, why particular kind of petroleum is the only fuel we have, why silicon is the key purveyor of electronics, why we do not have a cure for cancer in a normal way, while it is probably the biggest demand. So question of market demand versus private sector, and private sector must make profit, but the role of other actors, civil, government, knowledge industries, needs to rebalance so we have a more uniform society. The private sector, nothing against it, but it's pixel of the picture.
Thank you. Any other questions? One or two you can pick up still? It seems not the case. Then we have still time to, if anyone will. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Shane Rosenthal. I'm the Asian Development Bank Country Director here in Georgia. A recurring theme in the discussion has been the challenge of being a transit or corridor country, host country, in a modern world where information is transferred through perhaps other means that might fly over that corridor, and how we are living in a world where it is no longer a caravanserai situation. How can those corridor communities, those corridor countries, and I'm not talking just about Tbilisi, I'm also talking about hinterland communities, how can they benefit from this? Is there a risk that despite massive investments in infrastructure, leapfrog technologies, that still these communities and these countries don't experience the kind of inclusive results that we'd all like to see?
Very good question. Anyone from? Yes, please.
This is a very interesting question, and there is a risk, yes, but at the end of the day, I think a lot of new so-called hubs are going to be created across Eurasia, which is currently being actually created. I often give the example of caravansarais, but yes, in the past there used to be caravansarais, but these caravansarais differ from one another because it boiled down to the mode of transportation. Mode of transportation in the ancient times were camels. Camels used to travel about 40 kilometers a day. Every 40 kilometers you hit small caravansarai. This was a one-star hotel, basic amenities. Every 4 or 5 days journey, you hit small townships. There was caravansarai, but this was a 3-star. Your first destination, where there was a big 5-star, was about 1,000 kilometers away. So imagine entire Eurasia covered with these 5 stars, 3 stars, and 1 star. So what we are seeing today is emerging of these 5 stars, 3 stars, and 1 stars. Yes, some may be 2 stars aiming to become 5 stars. They would not make it to 5-star, so that because obviously there has to be a reasonable amount of 5 stars where all these knowledge economies are going to be concentrated. So they will become a 5 stars. Others will end up being 2-star. So in the first place, they may have been even not a 1-star, but at the end of the day, I think it's a win-win for everyone.
Yes, please, Professor.
So that analogy about flying over is a good one, but it actually answer is inverted. We need to think of that through industrial consolidation that exists in the world today. The plane flying across is made up of some rare earths from China, some metals from Australia, some people flying it from all over the world. People selling those tickets are from somewhere else. People owning those companies come from elsewhere. Investment is from somewhere else. So flying over doesn't take away the agency of what it's flying over. That is integrated into how things work today. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. Yes, please.
But I think that this fast logistics transport is also creating another possibility, because we have to not forget about the human at the center of who is the knowledge worker. And they are looking for a place to settle and work, which is as ideal to them as is possible. And so rather than flying over Azerbaijan or Georgia, if you have this phenomenally fast internet and you have the entire cultural facilities available and you have a beautiful scenery and you have fabulous weather, which many of these places do have, then you could create the knowledge factory right there and then, if you have the proper environment, if it is free, if there is free exchange of ideas, and if this 1-star in secret actually becomes a 5-star knowledge factory. So there is that possibility that exists, and it is happening in different parts of the world.
Thank you. I think the last question from audience helped me to link next questions which are really relevant, what you ask, competitiveness. And I just want to ask now, maybe starting with our 2 deputy ministers, to help us to learn more about government's efforts to promote regional cooperation and economic corridors and make them competitive and efficient. What steps taking your governments? Then others could, of course, add. Please, with you, start.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, let's name the corridors. Let's start naming the corridors in which Georgia is part of. Let's start with Persian Gulf, Black Sea, Northern Corridor, the Middle Corridor, Lapis Lazuli Corridor. Yeah. Also, we are working together with other countries. Also, I will name as a part of Middle Corridor, Baku-Tbilisi-Kars Railway. Since 2016, we became the full-plate member of CAREC organization. Yeah. And we do hope that this whole corridor, this is not only the transportation, as it was mentioned here, because transportation, the margin of profit in transportation is quite low. And in logistics, for example, in 3PL services, in labeling, in packaging, in added value services, the profit margin is way higher, right? So what we should do is to promote our corridor, to promote our possibilities, what we already possess. And this is a brilliant platform, for example, to have roadshows, to have more dialogue with neighboring countries. The closed economies never prevail. So that's why connectivity is a key issue here. And once we have these platforms, we should use this. We should combine our forces. We should elaborate programs. We should spread over this information and then to benefit out of this. I think this is the main role of the government, to be more active, to be more loud, and to help the business to connect with each other. For example, why it's needed, it was also raised this question, and I just briefly want to respond to it. Why it's needed to invest in the infrastructure, and what is the expectation out of this, how the citizens will benefit out of this. Simply the fact that infrastructure is in place is not the base of flourishment of the economy, right? Then we should link to this infrastructure added value services. We should add something that will bring value for the citizens. For example, why e-commerce? Why digitalization? Because it's not necessarily to come to the market and to sell your product. It's very simply to say. When you have e-commerce, supplier and the customer will have better chance to find each other. And when the infrastructure is in place, transportation cost and the time is less and efficient. So that's how it works in the country-wise, in village, in city, and in global corridors, in global economies. So that's why we should do this.
Was not.
Tajikistan is a part of CAREC, this corridor, and lots of investments is made to improve our part of this corridor, and we have invested $1.5 billion to improve our part of corridor, and we need another $6.3 billion to further improve infrastructure. And I can reiterate what my colleagues earlier mentioned. We needed only to improve infrastructure in Tajikistan, but also for our neighbors in region. Informatics, e-commerce, logistics, automated systems. These are essential parts and components today. We just started working on logistical components 2 years ago, and there's a lot to be done along this way. And our corridors with neighbors were closed, and today we have 12 corridors with our neighbors, and it helped to foster and facilitate informatics, and we became part of regional infrastructure. And again, I would say there is still room for improvements. We take every effort to improve this, but we experience a lack of resources that were used to exchange information and knowledge. And I believe this corridor of knowledge will help us to untap potential and to harness all these efforts, and I believe that that our government is committed to improve the infrastructure.
Is government what government can do to improve efficiency, competitiveness of transport corridors and economic corridors in CAREC region? What could be done extra, if anyone would like to add? Yep, please.
Not extra, but I think the key is obviously for the government to take care of the infrastructure. The rest has to be done by the private sector in big companies, and obviously the gentleman mentioned the big international firms that have this knowledge. So our aim has to be to transfer this knowledge to region and make sure that it works properly. Because yes, there might be, Maersk may have automated all that system, but today a container coming from China via Kazakhstan, through Azerbaijan, to Georgia, to Black Sea, we still have to fill some papers. So we are not yet there, but that's our aim.
Well, I would like to speak for the knowledge centers of this region. The reality is that if you look at any of the rankings of top academic institutions of the world, then the share that should belong to this region of Central Asia doesn't belong. And we have to ask the question why, and then ask the question what role does government have to play to change that. And if you go back 30 years, because this is all essentially was part of the Soviet Union in some manner. There was a knowledge system that involved universities and the academies of sciences, and Seth and I spoke earlier about that. At some point in time, this connection was broken, and it has not. This Humpty Dumpty has not been put back together again, which is resulting in the institutions not playing their due role. And so why is knowledge not being transformed and generated in this part of the world as it used to be in the past and as it is capable of. And I think that the universities and institutions of higher learning need government attention, support, and building up, because they are very, very crucial and key players in this thing. It never happens that you can take any knowledge and just transport it from place A to place B and use it. If you take, let's say, hydropower, then the particular requirements of this region, the way the soil is, earthquake characteristics, where the water flows, its pH, whatever, it is entirely different. And it is not a simple matter of taking one thing and just doing it at another place. It has to have local ownership and development. And that is what adds value. So if you want to add value, you have to build your institutions. And probably the most crucial role of the government is to incentivize that and actually direct that and make it happen.
Okay, thank you. Yes, please. Dr. Sanghvi, please.
Yeah, once again, perhaps I will, in a way, echo a little bit what just Dr. Naqvi suggested. Basically, from where I stand, again, the representative of the university-based think tank, I would wish to see a greater cooperation between the government and think tanks. We, again, in the context of this panel, we spoke about knowledge corridors. And we basically said that universities, think tanks, research institutions are mainly the generators of the knowledge. But then, again, I mentioned absorptive capacity and the government's willingness to hear the voice, to digest, to help deliver the results of universities and think tanks' work to the private sector is very key. So I would wish to see a very strong cooperation between the government, and the key word here is independent think tanks. We are talking about regional cooperation, and obviously the role of public sector, the role of government is to represent their country's strategic agendas. In often cases, and that's the way it should be, supported by a strong political agenda, and therefore role of independent think tanks is very key because independent think tanks produce evidence that is independent in many ways. It's just evidence. It's independent of sort of political foundations, if you wish, and for regional cooperation, such evidence, such information is of particular importance. Just to give you a very quick example, ISET, International School of Economics, which I represent under CAREC funding, did a research. It basically looked at a value chain participation index of CAREC countries and found out that cooperation is very weak. Participation in regional value chains is quite weak. And now we are trying to take this research to the next level to look at sort of industry to industry value chain participation. So here, and obviously think tank produces such study, shares with the clients that want to learn about it, but obviously for the government strategies it is very important to digest such evidence and also sort of engage private sector. So in a way I see government also being a conduit and carrying the very important role in realizing what the knowledge corridors are.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Saxena, please.
Yes, thank you. I had a great conversation with Professor Naqvi this morning about this particular topic, so it's just to kind of expand on what has already been said. but a slightly critical note. So what we've seen is that what I call, with a broad brush, with some details missing, that a particular Germanic model from a previous century of how knowledge production institutions were created. So the idea of Academy of Sciences and universities that evolved, I would argue, to benefit of people and countries within the Soviet Union and today also in China, it was disrupted, and that's what Professor Naqvi very clearly explained. It created a particular problem. The problem is that it's not a problem only that exists in this former Soviet space. This is something Germany, France, and Italy, and other countries of Europe are also struggling with, because the predominance of so-called ratings, which have come out of an Anglo-Saxon way of thinking about it. Japanese also are within the same boat. How you measure things, and what do they mean, and how they then force your policy to take place, is not, I would say, being done transparently and fairly. We need to look at that. What is happening is that the role of international institutions, i.e. World Bank or IMF or other agencies globally, not only from international but of certain countries, are commoditizing education and knowledge, and which is causing the problem and the disconnect that's taking place. So in fact, those actors are opposite to the knowledge corridors. They are sort of knowledge speed bumps in some sense that are being created as we go along in the reform in the region. So this kind of issue, we have a big working group in Cambridge for many, many years, and currently it's in the form of a project called COMPASS, which is called Comprehensive Capacity Building in Eastern Neighborhood and Central Asia, looking at the case of Belarus, Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan, and how these countries emerged from the same institutional background, but how the history was different and their future is different. And that doesn't get wrapped up in discussion of how we understand what institution will actually work, because there's a prescriptive idea that what institution will work, and that's complicated by the kind of metrics we use. And I'll give you an example very quickly. So Tokyo University, if you're an academic or not even an academic, you would say that it's a very important university. University which has a global standing in research, but its ranking is very low compared to its peer group. Because if you look at majority of ranking mechanisms, they put word internationalization in it. Internationalization doesn't mean your international research, it means how many international students you have. Why would Japanese teach in English to get a rating higher? These are questions you should be asking in the region when we're looking at such metrics.
Thank you, very, very interesting ideas. And I think we also finished the third question. I'm not going to now wrap up it, because the next question is mainly about instruments which helps our knowledge ideas to get into policy document and strategic vision. You know, the CAREC program have many strategic documents for different areas, and soon in November in Tashkent there will be a ministerial meeting. For this meeting, CAREC program prepares transport strategy, and ministerial meeting have to approve. And I want to know from our two deputy ministers, help us to understand what are the key pillars of this strategy, and what are the countries hoping to gain from this strategy, and maybe a little bit highlight about knowledge part of this strategy. Any of you can start. Maybe as a host country. Yes, please.
Yeah, before talking regarding CAREC strategy, I just want to confess that in Georgia we did not have our own strategy of development of transport and logistics, and we should start with this one, I think. We have elaborated the draft of our domestic, let's say, national strategy how to develop transport and logistics, which are the priority projects for us in terms of infrastructure, in terms of institutional reforms as well, because it was clearly mentioned that we are post-Soviet country, despite the fact that already 27 years we got our independence and we did quite well with reforms. As you know, we still have a lot ahead to do. So in this regard, starting with national strategy, I think this document has to be adopted because it does not really matter whoever will be on which position. The clear vision of the development should be in place, and the players may vary time to time. Yeah, as for the CAREC strategy, definitely this is a very important document, the vision of 2013, what we have analyzed. This is the institutional reforms as well, infrastructure investments and the plan of investments in infrastructure, also cooperation with neighboring countries, vision of development of the trade, because this is not only the transport and logistics, this is also economy, right, linked to this. This is only tool to serve to the economy, right? So, and we do hope that in Tashkent we will have common understanding, because what we have revised this document, this is in line with our expectations and fully reflected all challenges what we have. So, this is so briefly to summarize.
Thank you. Пожалуйста, господин заместитель министра, ваша оценка.
Что касается Таджикистана,
as for Tajikistan, we have a strategy, which is a general plan of development up to 2035, and it is part of the national strategy. And as of today, we implement mid-term program, and after we elaborate this document, it should be adopted by government, and a lot has been done, and we comply with the provisions with all this document. As for infrastructure and logistics, we are just in line with the documents that were adopted by the government. As for the CAREC documents, I think Tajikistan will benefit from it, because we are mountains country, lots of mountains, and the component which is important is to provide security to traffic, and we now elaborate a system regarding the road traffic security that will elevate the budgeting and will help us allocate funds in a more proper and correct way, in a more transparent way. And I believe that that document will be adopted, and we do hope that we will benefit from the document that will be adopted in Tashkent, Uzbekistan.
Strategy. The strategy itself has a very good component, which we can call a knowledge component, and it makes it very valuable. Exactly what Deputy Minister said is, it's not about infrastructure only, but managing smartly assets, also bringing knowledge into the management of the finances, and also diversifying finances. It's exactly what we discussed today. So therefore, I think I wish. And also one more thing is CAREC Institute, as indicated in this strategy, as a knowledge connector and knowledge provider. So I wish success in approving, and we can implement jointly with our governments this strategy. We almost finished our dialogue, but before I start to make small closing remarks, I just want to each of our members of panel to give a feedback about today's discussion. What your major take from these discussions, and maybe one keyword which I have to take. I like to collect the keywords. Let's start from this side, Dr. Saxena, and then we go this side. Yes, please.
I would say that what's been quite it's a pleasure that we endorse each other's points. So coming from very different sectors, it's very important. There's a common theme in what we need to solve and what the opportunities are. But as I would echo both my academic-centered colleagues, that one thing governments in this region and globally, but particularly in this region, have to take on board the message Professor Naqvi gave. The thinking has to be independent in universities, whether it's a think tank or department, and they have to trust. If you have good institutions, you have to trust them to give you the best advice. If you try to manage what they're going to give you, you will just re-endorse what you're already thinking, and you will end up in a loop which may not be as productive as possible. So knowledge corridor, not a knowledge cycle only. It should not be a closed cycle. It should be flowing.
My key takeaway basically is how much has changed through the history of Silk Road, if you wish. But on another hand, how little has changed. I very much enjoyed the discussion. There has been immense intellectual exchange. I really appreciated having in the panel representatives of the government, of academia, think tanks, the port that belongs probably to all sides, I would say. Thank you very much.
Спасибо модератору. Сегодня мы получили очень огромную информацию из научных кругов, правительственных, аналитических центров. Я думаю, действительно, это будет полезная информация лично для меня с использованием вот в этих направлениях научных коридоров или научных коридоров знаний частного сектора и привлечения аналитических центров,
how to work and deal with universities, research centers, and indeed, government should open doors for universities and analytical centers to provide funds for universities and analytical centers, make them independent to come up with proper solutions. Thank you very much for that.
First of all, it's such honorable people around here and to talk with them. Definitely, what I have focused is that 90% of our talk was dedicated to the future plans and exchange of the ideas and experience. We should gain this experience from each other. We should change ideas, and we may have different point of view for some certain cases, but at the end of the day, changing of and brainstorming regarding some themes and some ideas is always useful for us because we have more broader view of the problem or of the challenge. Thank you.
The major takeaway is obviously to have a pleasure to meet you all and to be back in Tbilisi. But on a serious note, obviously, you may not know, but about 10 years ago, I used to be an expert of ADB. So I used to travel a lot to the region. And compared to 10 years, a lot of things have changed. And I authored a book, which was independent, in an essence that it was a study, whether or not Azerbaijan, for example, can become a hub. And then it turned out that I was appointed to implement this study. So it is very important to do these independent studies and to properly assess and advise the government which way to take. So if it's possible, you have to say it's possible. If it's not possible, you have to conclude that it's not possible. Or what should be the mechanism to make it possible. So in that sense, CAREC Institute has a major role to play, and I wish all the best and for successful passing of this strategy, which is very important. We have to align our visions if we want to create a common future. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity to meet and interact with different parts of this system that is now connected. And the question that I would pose is, now that you have these corridors, physical as well as digital and knowledge corridors, what can we do about that? And you had used the word instruments earlier. And would like to propose that a knowledge fund be established. Because what is the point of having Uzbekistan and Azerbaijan and Georgia connected if you are not able to use the knowledge assets in these institutions to address a problem that is of interest. And here is the opportunity that the problem definition can be, is the domain of the government. So they can look at what is it that is an issue that they would like to use these best brains to tackle, pose the problem, and then there is a pot of money available in which people can compete with possible solutions. This is a very normal way in which solutions are created, except now that you have the entire region able to join forces to address that. So I'd like to leave this as a suggestion.
Thank you. Maybe yes. I again would like to play with this keyword which is, came from you: trust, cycle, change, state, future, independent studies, advice, knowledge assets, knowledge instruments, and also knowledge fund. These are the things which actually itself could be concluding remarks from my side. But let me also stress a few things which is important. First of all, you help us to understand the importance of knowledge cooperation, what type of cooperation we can have in this region, and role of these different players in these corridors: governments, think tanks, businesses, development partners. And also, we had also discussion of how we can make knowledge profitable commodity and use it for the purpose and good of communities. And then also you gave a lot of ideas on how knowledge generation, articulation, and transformation can promote regional economic cooperation. All this electronic commerce, electronic trade, easing trade, all these ideas are really great ideas which really could help enhance our cooperation. What I can say that we, for a certain extent, identified missing elements in knowledge cooperation in the region. That's very good, and I think this is what we expected. And clarified roles of different players, identified necessary steps from your suggestions. Actually, CAREC Institute, as being a knowledge connector of CAREC program, started this initiation of discussion and dialogue much earlier. And we actually, ourselves, were struggling. What do we do with these knowledge corridors? What is this? And today, we made one step further, understanding. And that your different backgrounds and ideas gives us really streamlined planning and steps the next way. I think what we promise is that, first of all, we will document this process and share with all of you for your commenting, for your suggestions. The next thing is what we could do is that we have to indeed try to make instruments for cooperation. That's good, discussions are good, but also instruments. One instrument or platform is this CTTN network, which brings think tanks. But I think we have to extend their role for academia, a role for governments, role for independent researchers. These ways are open, and I think this is an opportunity. One thing, I would use the first word, the trust. Trust is outcome of knowledge. Only knowledgeable people can trust each other. People with lack of knowledge always will suspect each other. The partnership comes when we share the knowledge and learn from each other. So in this point, I just want to finish and thank all of you for your great contributions, for your time, and government of Georgia for organizing excellent forum where our side event took place, and also Asian Development Bank colleagues to pushing it, to making it happen, and actually doing a good catalysator of dialogue. This is exactly what happened today. And also I would like to thank our colleagues who contribute. Batu is sitting here, and I think all of you know him, and he was writing a lot of emails and contacting you. Thank all of you for contribution. And I wish all of us a good work and also a good rest and seeing good and beautiful city of Tbilisi. It's worth of it. And I think we could continue our dialogues. And I would say one of our colleagues could get the next dialogue continuing, maybe dialogue number 2. Thank you.